Hello everyone, my name is Sergey Morinets and I would like to welcome all the participants of our workshop Configuration Management in Java Applications. It's our first webinar, first event this year, and I hope it will be useful for all of us. First of all, how is sound? It's easier to adjust it at the beginning. Let me introduce myself. I am Java developer, trainer, teacher, writer. I wrote 4 programming books, and I often participate in various educational events in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. Last year was rather tough, and I had only one participation, but let's hope that this year will be more promising and we will have more great talks, great conferences in Ukraine and outside of Ukraine. So let's start. What is the talk about? In our IT courses, IT Discovery, we have a lot of trainings about development, how to develop applications. And I find it useful to create a talk about how to create and access configuration in your applications. And we took 3 platforms. I think they are very popular. It's Spring or Spring Boot. It's Java EE or Jakarta EE, and so-called micro web frameworks. Currently, it's Micronaut. It's not so well known, but let's see what will be this year. So we will just take our code and try to configure our applications in all the possible ways. I already posted a link to our working repository. Please download it or clone it so that you can keep track on my changes. Interesting moment. I plan to use Thorntail. Thorntail is a replacement for Wildfly Swarm because it's rather stable product and it allows us to run our applications independently of our web server. But when I started development, started planning, I saw that it reached end of life. It was about 6 months ago. So you see that everything is changing, and I replaced Thorntail with Quarkus, but Quarkus still uses some of the concepts that we see in Thorntail, so it will be like adequate replacement. So let's start our demo. Here is my project. It contains 5 modules, and in each module you see some sample code and the same configuration file called application properties, and we'll try to use it for our platforms. Let's start with the simplest examples. It's simple vanilla Java. So first of all, why do we need to split actual code and configuration? Why we can't just put our configuration into our code? The answer is simple, because first of all, we don't want to recompile our project if our settings have changed. And secondly, we might want to add so-called multiple configurations or profiles. We will touch this topic today. So that the main reason why we separate configuration, and you see that there is a a special folder, source folder, SSC main resources, and my file application properties. So is it possible to access and use it from the simple JDK? Yes, that's possible, and there is not simple but stable and working API. There is a special class called properties, and it allows you to load properties from some input stream. But how to create this input stream based on this application properties file? We can use their API from JDK and use get class loader function, which allows to access function get resource as stream and specify our application properties. This function returns input stream so that we will use in our code. Since it's input stream at this resource, let's wrap it into try with resources so that we don't need to close it explicitly. And then we just need to supply this input stream into properties, load, and then let's write our property value. Library name is class properties get property, and the name of the property is library name, and let's use default value. For example, it's property not found, NA. Let's try to run our code. And you see that property was found. So that's one of the simplest examples. Let me commit it and edit change number 1. Is there any other way to access these properties files using simple Java? Yes, it's possible. We can use the same properties object, but access the file not as a resource of our class path, but using this our file or Java input-output API. So we can use rather new path type that appeared in Java 7 and construct full path from the root of our project. It's a demo, and create a root path JDK SRC main resources application properties. Yeah, so this is a full path, and here we also has input stream, but we don't use the class loader API. We just need to use files class and new input stream path, and other code is the same. Let's try it and change to discovery 2 so that we keep track of every change in our project. Yeah, we see that working fine. How do you think? What is the main issue with above two approaches? Please write your questions in the chat or in the Slack chat. We have both. I will commit my changes. So for me, the major issue here is that we can't modify the property value outside of application. So for example, if I try to supply value by system property, I need to use system get property library name, or I can use, if I want to use environment variables, get env and also library name. So you see that this completely different API, and it's not compatible with the properties file. Although both of our values are configuration settings, and as a programmer I would like to use and access it the same API. So Java doesn't allow me to do that. So Spring Framework in 2001 created a simple API to access our properties, and let's see how it works in Spring. So in Spring project, it's actually Spring Boot. We have only one dependency. It's a Spring Boot starter web, and we have the same library name property. Let's change it to Discovery 3. And we have main application. It's our Bootstrap class from Spring Boot. And we have a library controller, which is our REST controller. So we see that currently we just return hard-coded string. Can we parameterize our REST service and use the value from this application properties file? Yes, that's possible. So first approach, which is very simple, we create a new field library name, and we use the standard value annotation, and we need to specify a library name as a placeholder, so we surround it with the curly braces. If we try to change it to the library name, and let's see, it's library 3. Let's run our main application. Okay, and try to access it. Yes, you see that it's working and we can parameterize. How do you think? What is the main disadvantage of this approach that I just wrote and offered to you? Let me make my commit. Please write your questions and answers. So the main issue here that it's not safe. Yes. So if there is no such property, our application will fail to start. So if you want to use safe approach, you can use another colon and say an A. Yes, that means if library name is not found, then library name field will be n/a. Another disadvantage is that we have to create each property for each field for each property. If we don't want to do that, then we can comment out our field and create new field environment. Environment is API and abstraction to access all the configuration settings in Spring applications. We can supply it both from properties file, from command line, environment variables, and so on. And now we can use get property function. We need to specify the property name and default value. Let's change to Discovery 4 and run it again. Okay, let's try it now, and you see that it also works. So this example shows that we have two approaches. First is declarative, and second is more programmatic. Yes, because we define how to access our properties. But this approach is also not ultimately safe, because we can make some mistyping and specify incorrect property. So what can we do now? We can use a feature that is available only in Spring Boot called configuration properties. What is it? We can create a new class called library configuration. We need to add a new annotation here, configuration properties, and specify the top level prefix. In our case, it's library. Add getter. Add a new field called name. And how will Spring Boot behave? It sees the library configuration. It will analyze the top level library, and it will find the name property, and it will find that there is a library.name setting in our properties file, and it will try to map our property value to the field value in our configuration. And after that, we can comment out our environment class and just use private library configuration, also auto void. And in this case, we don't need to use this API of environment and specify hard-coded strings. Instead of that, we use the getter for library configuration, and it's the task of compiler to check that this code will compile. How do you think? Will it such approach work or not? Please write your option in our chat in Slack or YouTube. So let me write this code. And you see that there is an issue, exception. Exception very simple. There is no such bin library configuration. How do you think we can fix this exception? The answer is very simple. If there is no such bin, let's declare as a bin. So let's add a annotation component and run it again. Exception again, but there is a different exception. No setter found for property name. So Spring Boot requires that this feature was used together with setters. So it doesn't want to inject the property value by reflection, and it wants setters. So let's put setter annotation of book. Let's write our code again. Okay, application started, and you see that it also works. So we now see different approach on configuration management in Spring. Let me make my commit as usual. What else Spring can offer to Java developers? profiles. Yeah, so profiles allow us to specify different environments for our properties. So for example, development environment, testing environment, stage environment, and production environment. How can we achieve that in our Spring application? It's very simple. So for example, we have application properties. We have here the discovery, let's make it 6. And now we can specify a different profiles in this exact file. It's a rather cool feature in Spring Boot 2.4. If we want to add new profile here, we need to add a special comment, hash character and 3 dashes, and create a new value here, library name equals to discovery 7, and we need to specify the condition to turn on this profile. And there is a special property in Spring called Spring config activate on profile, and let's specify a dev profile. You see that my editor, it's IntelliJ, says that something is incorrect, but I think that just some minor issue in the editor. Let's write our code, and we see that their value is discovery 7. So how to achieve more? So currently, let me commit my change. Yes, one error, activate on profile dev. Yes, let's try it again. Yeah, now it's correct, 6. How can we activate dev profile? We need to edit our properties of our main application and add option add VM options here, and specify system property called Spring profiles active equals dev. Yes, you see that this login statement that we activated dev profile, and you see that we use not the discovery 6 because it's like a default profile, but we use the properties from the dev profile. Yes, and you see that all the properties from all the profiles are in the single file. Let's commit my changes. Okay, let me see what about your questions. Okay, so everything is working fine, but all our configuration is static and it's local. Yes, so if we use microservices, it's very hard to change it dynamically. What can we do? We can use distributed configuration or distributed key value system. For example, Spring supports 3 types of such configuration: Spring Cloud Config Server, Zookeeper, and console. So you can use what you want, what is easier for you, what you know the best. Let's try to use console. Console is a software developed by the company called HashiCorp, HashiCorp is a well-known company. It produced a lot of new technologies, for example, Vault and others. And Consul is technology, its main responsibility is service discovery and lookup. But additional feature is distributed configuration. I already started our console container using Docker, and let's try to see what it happens. So here is a console ABI. It uses port 8500, and you see that there is a different options. For example, you can see all the services, all the nodes, and key value. Now it's empty, so let's try to create something. So console supports hierarchical configuration. So let's create a folder called library. Since it's folder, we appended a slash at the end. And in library, let's create a key name. And let's copy it from here and use the key value rediscovery 8. Let's save it. Everything is okay. How can we use console key value in our Java application? So there is a Java driver or Java client that you can use. And Spring offers integration using Spring Cloud Platform. So you can just include one of the Spring Cloud dependencies to integrate your Spring application and console server. So let's do it now. Here is our POM XML for Spring application. Let's add a new property called Spring Cloud console version. Current version is 3.01, and add a new dependency. The artifact is Spring Cloud console Spring Cloud starter console config, and the version is not this one because it's rather old. Let's use the one that we just created. Let's download our dependencies. Yeah, everything is fine. So with the dependency, and we need to specify the location or address or URI of our console server. In Spring Boot 2.4, there was a rather cool feature called Spring Data Import. It simplifies the configuration of this distributed config servers, and what we need to just we can remove this one, it's not used here, and comment this one, and create a new property called Spring config import, and use just value console. Console is not the name of the server, it's something like a keyword. Yes, there are 4 such keywords to support distributed configuration. Let's try to run our main application. And you see that we have an exception, unable to load config data from console. So Spring config import requires special convention, and what we need to do, we need to specify the host name, localhost, and the port. Let's try it again. Okay, now application started properly. Let's try to use our library service, and nothing happens. And you see that, let's try what is here, and you see it's okay, but it's not. Why is that? Because the problem here is that Spring Cloud config uses special folders in our remote servers. So by default, it's searched in the folder default, and there is no such folder. What can we do? We can adjust our configuration and add a new folder. We can separate by semicolon and add a root folder. Let's run it again. And you see it discovery 8. Yes, the same value as here. Yeah. So you see that integration of console and Spring Boot is very simple. Just add new dependency and add this Spring config import, and that's all. And you can store your configuration remotely and access it in all your Spring applications. Okay, let me commit my code. Let's change number 7. And let's switch to another folder and platform called Quarkus. Quarkus is a so-called micro framework. It was designed 2 or 3 years ago to support lightweight microservices, and it also supports a very cool feature called Graal VM native images. So it offers very fast startup, minimum memory consumption, and it's perfect for modern microservice developments. It also supports some Microprofile specifications. At least Microprofile is an extension to Java EE, or currently Jakarta EE specification, that allows you to develop microservices using Jakarta EE specification. So let's check what we have in this subproject. We have the same application properties file. We have a library resource. It's the same simple REST service using JAX-RS because it's Jakarta EE, and that's all. Let's change it to discovery 9. And what we can do now is try to read the value from our properties file. So we can do it different ways. So firstly, we can add a new field called library name. There is no such annotation like value, but there is another annotation called config property, which accepts a name, and name is just property name, library.name, without any placeholders. So let's try to use library name here and try to run our application. Quarkus doesn't have bootstrap class like Spring, so we have to use another approach. Let's move to Quarkus folder and use this Quarkus dev command to run Quarkus in development mode. Okay, let's try to run it here, and you see that it returns the value from application properties file. So that's very cool. It works fine. Let me commit my changes. Change number 8. Does Quarkus offer the same API like environment in Spring? Yes. So we can just comment out this code and use abstraction called config. You see that config is not a Quarkus specific API, it's part of so-called Eclipse Microprofile config. It's specification how to create and access configuration in Jakarta applications. So we can just add the config property, not auto-wired but inject because it's Java. And here we can use config get value and use library name and an a. Not an a, it's a class. So let's okay, let's change to 10 and run it again. Okay, let's try once more. Yeah, it's working. Okay, let me close my application and add a new change number 9 to our list of commits. Does Quarkus offer the same API like Spring Boot in configuration properties? Yes, it's working. Let's use the code from our existing project. Here we have library configuration. So let's copy it here. Library configuration. But there is a minor difference. First of all, we need to add a new annotation config properties. So in the configuration, config properties, add the top level prefix library. Everything else is the same. And in our library source, let's commit it here and add a new library configuration and add inject, and here we can use library configuration getName. Let's change properties to 11 and run our application again. Okay, let's try now, and you see it also works. So Quarkus offers the similar functionality, but it has one unique feature. Let's close Quarkus. Let me commit change number 10 We can convert our class actually to interface. Let's do it now. Interface. We don't need field, we need a method. We don't need getter and setter. And everything else is the same, but we need to convert getter to name. And let's try to run it now. Let's change to 12. Okay, and you see that it also works. So how does it work? Quarkus just create a proxy for this interface, and this proxy access our microprofile config. So it's work the same way as with class, but it's very cool. Yes, we don't need class here, we can use interface as well. Let's make me commit. What if you want to use microprofile config, but you don't have, for example, CDI, or you have some very simple like a Java SE application, and also you don't have CDI. Can you use this functionality? Yes. So we can comment out this, and access config is rather unusual way. We can use it here. So config equals to config provider get config, and then config get value library dot name string dot class. Let's rename to 13 and restart our application. Okay, let's try. Yeah, it also works. So if you want to use microprofile config in your application and you don't have, for example, Java or Jakarta, you can just use this very plain API to access your configuration. Let me make commit. Does Quarkus offer or support profiles like Spring does? Yes, but it supports in a rather unusual way. So for example, we have library.name. It's a property for the default profile. And if you need to add a property for another profile, for example, for dev profile, we have to do the following. We need to specify like library name equals IT discovery 14 dev. But how can we specify this for dev profile? We need to add a dev dot library name, and how Quarkus understand that it's not a dev property like a dev profile, we need to add a percentage. Yes, let's try it now. Oops, sorry. Let's do it one more time. Okay, let's run it. Magic. So why do we use the dev profile? We didn't specify dev profile. Yes, we have default profile. How do you think? So why Quarkus returns the value for dev profile? What is your suggestion? What is your answer? Let me commit my changes. Let me see your answers. So the answer is very simple. Since we run our Quarkus using the Quarkus goal and specify dev profile, that means the current profile is dev. Yes, and Quarkus displays a property value from dev profile. That's rather interesting. Does Quarkus support console? Yes, because again, Quarkus was designed with microservice architecture in mind, and it supports almost all the technologies, all the software that was designed for microservice needs. So let's comment out our code, and let's add a new dependency for Quarkus. It will be integration of Quarkus and console. So we will try again use console. The dependency is Quarkus console config. Let's try to import a new dependency. Let's try to change the value here. So change it to 15. Yes. Okay. Okay. By default, console config is not enabled, so we just need to add a new property, Quarkus console dash config enabled equals true. That's the first part. It's insertion part. We enable console config, and Quarkus uses console in some unusual way, so we need to specify that we won't just use the simple folder structure, and we need to use special property called Quarkus console dash config row value keys equals to library name. So let's try it now. And you see rather strange exception, yes, caused by datetime parse exception. Text cannot be passed to a duration. Yes, maybe you have ideas why it doesn't happen, because we don't have date values here, only the strings. Please post your ideas, maybe you have some suggestions or comments. So in default approach, Quarkus wants not the hierarchical keys like we did with Spring, it wants flat structure. So let's try to create a key library.name. So library here is not a folder, and create a IT. Let's copy it to discovery .16. Let's run it again. Okay, let's check what it's now, and you see that works. Yeah. So here the configuration is not as simple as for Spring, and so you need to analyze it and make your option. Let me commit my changes. Okay, and third platform is Micronaut. So Micronaut is a competitor of Quarkus, is also a microwave framework for microservice applications, but Quarkus uses Eclipse Microprofile, and Micronaut uses its own API, its own annotations, and so on. So let's compare two different approaches. What we have now? We have simple POM XML with three dependencies. It's Micronaut runtime. HTTP server is netty. It's just our logback as log provider. And here we have a bootstrap application like we had in Spring boot module. So we can run our application from IDE. We don't need to use some plugin. Also, we have a library controller that also returns some string by our library.name key. We also have application.properties file that contains well-known string at discovery. So let's add the new suffix 17 and try to integrate configuration here. So what can we do now? We can create again field called library name and use it instead our hard-coded string. How can we inject our setting here? There are two approaches. First approach is the same like Spring uses. It's a value annotation, but not value from Spring. It's a value from Micronaut, and we use the same placeholder, library.name. So let's try to run our Micronaut application and see what happens. Everything is okay, and let's try to access it. Yeah, it's working. Let me make my commit again. But the unique feature of Micronaut is that it offers another annotation called property, and here you need to specify the property name without placeholder. Yes, so that's like the chance not to do some mistyping and forget the placeholders. Let's change our value here and restart our application. Okay, yeah, it's working again. Let me commit my changes. Do we have programmatic access to our API? Let's comment out the library name field and check if there is some environment. Yes, and it's also environment not from Spring API, it's environment from API of Micronaut. Let's add inject. So inject we use to inject this environment into our REST service, and replace library name with get library name. The class is Spring and default value is a name. Yeah, so it's similar to Spring and Spring Boot. Let's increment our property and rerun our application. Okay, let's try now. Yeah, everything is okay. So we see that if you want to migrate from Spring or Spring Boot to Micronaut, that you still have the same API that you got used to. Does Micronaut offer configuration properties? Let's try it here as well. I will copy library configuration to our Micronaut project. We don't have component, we don't have configuration properties, but let's remove this annotation and add configuration properties, but from Micronaut. And again, we need top level prefix, it's library. Yes, so everything else is the same like in Spring Boot. Let's again auto increment. And check it here. You see that it's also working. Let me commit my changes. Does Micronaut support integration with console as a config? Yes, so it's similar to Quarkus, and I think you can do it by yourself if you want. So in our workshop, we took 20 different approaches to specify and access configuration in different Java platforms. So if you want to migrate your application or use it, so it's very simple and very intuitive in some ways. And I think that's great. We can choose what we want, the platform, the API, declarative, imperative, and so on. That's all for today, and I'm waiting for your questions. You can ask them in YouTube chat or Slack chat. And while I'm waiting, I want to invite you to our first trainings this year. So in 2 weeks, we have a first training called Microservice Patterns, where we will take most popular, most common resiliency patterns and try to understand and try to build our system based on our solutions. And at the beginning of April, we will have a new training. It's the first time we will have this training called Introduction into Kotlin. So if you want to understand what is Kotlin and how to use it, what's the difference with Java and other languages, so you are invited. It's now it's 1-day training, and I think it will be interesting and productive, because Kotlin now in the top 3 list of most loved language in IT industry. You see at the end our link to our events, so you can click and register to our trainings. So I'm waiting for your questions. There is a question from George Nikolaya. What about environment variables? Yes, you are right. So, for example, if we try to take our Micronaut application and specify their, let me modify option, environment variables. Yes, let's call library name equals to IT discovery 21. Let's do it now and see what will happen. It's interesting what is the top priority, the properties from the environment variables or from properties file. Not sure. Let's check it. Okay, and you see that the environment variables has the highest priority. Yeah, so you can use it as well in your application. There was another question about microservice patterns. Yes, this training will be in Russian, but I think maybe in summer or in autumn we will create trainings for English-speaking participants. Yes, currently it will be in Russian. You may ask me why we omitted Microprofile module. First of all, again, I used Thorntail, and Thorntail it's deprecated. It reached end of life, but it's similar, and API is similar to Quarkus. Yeah, so it's not so interesting to use it because it has the same API, because it uses the same microprofile config specification and the same library called small-ri config. So I think that's not so interesting, but if you want, you can take this submodule and try. It's very simple. Yes, it's one configuration class and one resource using JAX-RS. So that's all. So it's very similar to Quarkus. You may ask me how many approaches or how many ways to specify properties. So it's very and a lot of. If I'm not mistaken, Spring Boot search properties in 21 locations. So in our workshop, we used only 3. So it's system properties, it's environment variables, and properties file. So there are much more, like YAML file, or for example, we can use, there are no questions, let's try one more thing. Let's try not Quarkus, Spring, resources, applicable properties. Let's comment out this and let's comment out this again. How do you think if I create a new file application.json, yes, and add a very simple JSON library name equals one second discovery 22. How do you think will it work or not? Let's try to answer in our chat. How do you think will it work or not if I try to start as a Spring application? So we know that Spring and Spring Boot supports properties files, supports YAML files, but does Spring support JSON files? How do you think? Let's try to run our main application. Let's do it now. And no, we have an error. Why is that? Because Spring doesn't support JSON properties by default, and we need to add property source and add application.json. Let's try it now and see how it works. Maybe we need class path, but let's see how it works here. Okay. Yeah, it works fine. So you see that you can use even JSON files in your Spring Boot application. Let me commit this step as well. And there's a question from George Nikolai: can we inject properties as constants? I think that's not possible because constants are defined at compile time, and properties, property values are computed, defined at runtime time when our container starts. So I think it's not possible. Another question: does I think Spring and other platforms support string interpolation? Let's try it. It's a very interesting feature. What is it's called property extension. What is it? Let's create some additional suffix. So what is it? For example, we have a property library.name equals to discovery 23, and 23 is a gain property. It can be taken from system properties and my variables and so on. So what can we do here? We can create a library.index. It's another property, and we can use it here. Discovery library.index. So you see that we use the placeholder inside property value. Let's try it now. How it works? Yeah, it works fine. Yeah, so Spring supports, and it's very, very cool and useful feature. What about Micronaut? Let's try to check Micronaut. Does it support or not? Application properties, and use 24. Micronaut. Let's run it again. Strange push is enabled. Okay, let's try it. Micronaut, why it's 21. It's strange because library index is 24 and it still uses some old value. It's very strange. Let's do 25. Oh, there is some exception inside Micronaut. Let's check it here. What is the exception? No, it's an internal error. I don't think it's relevant. So let's try it again. Oh, it uses still 21. Not sure why. I think it's just used some old value. Let's say the library name equals. So we need to investigate why it works this way. But again, I think it's working. Oh yes, you are right, guys. Yes, we have a main variable. Let's try one more. But you see that in Spring, the properties files has higher priority than environment variables because it will not hurt our code. Yes, it also works again in our Micronaut application. Okay, now the questions, is it possible to set property for different profile in Spring like in Quarkus? No. First of all, def is not in the end property, it's the beginning of property. So if we check the Quarkus, and you see that there is a def at the beginning. It's a prefix, not suffix. And Spring doesn't support it, fortunately or not. And here we have another option, like we have special separator, hash and 3 dashes, and here we specify our current profile. So the Spring uses property Spring dot config dot activate on profile equals dev, and then you can here you can specify all the properties for dev profile. In Quarkus we have to add this prefix dev for each property. So it's up to you to decide what is the best. For me this is simpler, yes, because we group all the property values around this profile. Another question from George and Nikolai: can we pass variables, let's say from Maven properties to applicant properties? Yes, that's possible, but minor clarification, not from Maven properties to application properties, but from Maven properties to a global project configuration. Yes, because properties file is one of the sources for our global configuration. So you can just supply your custom properties, for example, in a Maven compiler plugin or other plugin, and I think it will be used by Spring at runtime. Okay, So what was the question? Is it possible to set property for different profiles in Spring like in Quarkus? Again, I think not. I've never seen such examples. And Spring uses another approach. It doesn't include the profile name into property name. Yes, it just has special property. In Spring boot to the fore, it's spring.config.activating and in the early version of Spring Boot is spring.profiles. So it's a different approach. What is the way to define different Spring profiles in JSON file? Will the annotation be the same? I think for JSON files, first of all, JSON files are very rare guest in Spring configuration. Yes, usually we use either properties files or YAML files. It's like more convenient. But if you want to use JSON, so let's comment this. I will remove this, it's not used. And comment this as well. Then we can do the following. We can use, 1 second, it's 24 application. So we can do the following. We can use 25 here, library name, and add a new file, or even better, we can just copy paste. Copy paste here is not an anti-pattern. Application dot dash dev. Yes, and at 26 dev. And now we can use main application and use, we already have the dev profile. That's fine. Let's try to run it. So here we have 25 to 26. Let's do it. It's 25. So Spring profiles active equals dev. So probably for JSON, their profiles are not working, like it's working for properties file and YAML file. So you might want to customize it. I've never used JSON files, so I think it requires investigation how to provide profiles here. Okay, guys, more questions? Let me check and commit all the pending changes. So you see that there are our repository. If you're interested, please fork it or download it. We might delete it somewhere in the future. So please do it today or tomorrow. So no more questions. Again, you are welcome to attend our trainings, and if you are from Ukraine, then later this month we will provide the workshop again called Kotlin versus Java, and 10 years of battle or 10 years battle. So you can also check it on our site, and you are welcome to attend it. It's free. Yes, it will be free. This workshop is free, and Kotlin workshop will be free. Okay, another question. Is it possible to initialize complex object on properties, not only key value, list, or map? Yes, that's possible for YAML. So, for example, if you have a YAML file, yes, for example, let's file application YAML, and for example, you have some property called library names, and names will be like lib1, lib2, lib3. So it's a list. I think you agree that it's a list. And for library configuration, we need the following. 1 second. We need a private list string names. And Spring Boot will map and inject your values here. If you need map, I think yes, it's possible. So for example, if you have something like a library config, and for example, like address is like Ukraine, for example, like hours equals like from like 9 to 17 and so on. So you can again map it in our library configuration and create the private map string dot string and call it again config. And Spring Boot will also map it and inject your values. So that's I think that's possible. That's possible. Let me push this again. Okay, so no more questions. Thank you all, guys. I like your attention and that you asked your questions. So thank you. You can watch this workshop later today or tomorrow. And bye-bye. Thank you. That's all for today.